Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Road to an Effective Classroom Environment. I am your host, Dr. LaShanta, also known as the Classy Sassy Consultant, and I thank you for coming back to finish up this series in which we have been talking about chronic absenteeism. So this is going to be a 10 to win part 4, and we're going to be talking about aversion and disengagement as reasons as to why our students may not want to attend school. But just to give you a recap on what we have discussed in the prior episodes. In the first episode, we did a general look at chronic absenteeism, defined it, also talked about some stats. The second episode was geared more towards our parents, in which we began looking at misconceptions. We know this is the summertime for the most part for our students across the United States, but we wanted to make sure that we keep this topic in the forefront and make sure that parents understand that as they are preparing for their students for the upcoming school year, just how important attending school is. And so just talked a little bit about those misconceptions that are out there so that parents, as well as anyone who did not have a knowledge of the impact that attendance has, just giving you a few nuggets of information that would help you. And then in our third episode, we looked at one of the barriers. We looked at barriers towards chronic absenteeism. So today we're closing the series out because we're going to talk about aversions and we're going to talk about disengagement. Now, I'll combine these two topics instead of making them separate episodes because we have talked about disengagement in detail in other episodes whenever we were addressing the classroom environment and talking about what disengagement looks like for our students. So we're going to briefly go over those topics. We're going to go over some of those things, and but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on disengagement because, as I said, we've gone into an extensive detail about that, and we'll continue to talk about disengagement because that is a big topic there in regards to an effective classroom environment. We want to make sure that our students are engaged fully in what they are learning, in that learning experience when they are in there. But we are going to begin our discussion and talking about aversion. So this episode will identify and address aversions and disengagement and chronic absenteeism. And again, this is documented in attendanceworks.org. This is where a lot of this information is. And it's a great website for not just educators, but it's also a great site for parents. So again, if you're looking to have more information as to how being chronically absent does hinder a student's learning, then by all means, please go to that website, attendanceworks.org. A lot of valuable information there. All right, so let's just jump into this and get started. And so when we're talking about aversions, the word aversion, it sounds negative. Aversions are reasons as to why students do not want to come to school, or not necessarily don't want to, but they're not able to. So aversions are these issues that students have that are impacting them coming, but they're issues that are out of their hands. These are issues that are involving their environment, whether it's their parents, their home life, or it may be a diagnosis, but these are things that hinder the student from being in class. So let's talk about some of those things and what are they. So one aversion that students have is that if they're struggling academically or behaviorally, then they're turned off from school. So this is one of those aversions that is directly impacting that student, and the struggle academically may not be something that the student may be in control of. Because if a student is struggling academically, there may be some diagnosis that has not come to the forefront. For instance, if the student has a learning disability or is dyslexic, there may be reasons as to why the student may be struggling. It may not be that the child just doesn't want to do the work. So we're not talking about students who are electing not to do the work. That would fall under another totally different category, but we're talking about students in which they don't have the control over why they are struggling academically. And then behaviorally, again, diagnoses. Sometimes students have diagnoses that are not seen until they're in the educational setting and until they go through testing. That is when they are able to get the help that they need. But if the student is not able to sit still, or if the student is always sleeping in class and there isn't any outside reasoning as to why this should be happening, then that requires parents to take that step and make sure that testing is involved. And parents, you have to be active in that piece for your child. And sometimes, and speaking as a parent myself, my son was diagnosed as being, he was diagnosed as ADHD. And he also was diagnosed with ODD. So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And then ODD is oppositional defiant disorder. So he received that diagnosis and he was in kindergarten. And I was one of those parents that I was just totally against any type of medication. I didn't feel like ADHD existed, and I was that parent. But until I had the right persons who were in my ear that were helping me to see what I needed to see, and seeing my son in the setting at school, because at home, yeah, I could deal with him. I could work with him. And it was different for him being at home with me versus where you're in a school and you have to be still and you have to do, not have an outburst and things of that nature. But it took me being able to see him in the setting and actually taking the time to know, okay, yeah, something's going on. I need to, look into this and have him tested. And so as parents, we have to look into reasons as to why our students are struggling academically and behaviorally. And everything is not on the school. Sometimes we think that the school can fix, air quote, fix the child. And that may not be the case, because it takes all of us working together. It's not just on the school. It's not just on the parents. It's not just on the community, but it does take a totality of all three entities to really make sure that our students are doing well academically and behaviorally. Another aversion is students are turned off from a school climate that is unwelcoming. And we've had episodes in which we've talked about school climate and how important it is on the effectiveness of the classroom teacher, the students. And so a school climate that is unwelcoming, if a student doesn't feel welcome, doesn't feel loved, doesn't feel accepted, feels like an outcast, or is teased, taunted. And I'm not talking about just the students teasing and taunting, but also adults. If you are in a situation where you are taunting and teasing students, that will have an adverse effect on that child. That child will not want to come through those doors because they don't want the headache, they don't want the aggravation, they don't want the embarrassment. And so we have to be very cognizant of our school settings and making sure that no matter who the students are, all of us, we have something different about us. We all are different in some way, shape, or form. Our children a lot of times like to gravitate to others who are similar to them, or they may gravitate to others who are so different because they want to be similar to those students. Whatever the case may be, students need to feel as if they are welcomed in a school setting. So we have to make sure that we provide those types of environments for our children. Another aversion is when our students feel that they have peer pressure or that they're being challenged in some type of way. Social and peer challenges. Now, this can come in many forms. This can come in forms in which our children are asked to be involved in cliques, in gangs. If they are told to taunt or harass another student, to bully another student, when they're pulled in and they're told you can't be a part of us or you can't associate with us if you don't do X, Y, and Z. Those types of challenges, if a student is just not willing to do something that is against their character or is just not them, then they're going to try to avoid it. And how do you avoid these challenges? You don't come to school. So this is another aversion that our students deal with. Another one is anxiety, and that goes back to, diagnoses as well. Some students are medically anxious and they may need assistance, whether it's through therapy or it may take medication to help if they have those chemical imbalances that are causing anxiety because of outside situations that are impacting them. But we have children who are anxious for different reasons. And you might be listening to this podcast right now and you're like, well, what does a child have to be anxious about? When a child is going through, even a child who may have it all, they may have it all materially, but they may be missing something from their parents. They may not feel loved. They may not feel accepted. They may not feel as if they measure up. And then a child who is lacking food, shelter, then they're anxious because they don't know when the next meal is going to be coming in, or they don't know if they're going to have to watch their siblings because their mom or their dad, they're working 2 and 3 jobs and the responsibilities are falling on them. So do we have anxious children? Yes, we do. And so anxiety, when it sets in, that is another adverse reason as to why our students may not come to school. Another aversion is when our students are suspended for actions that are suspendable. When they are out of school, OSS, out of school suspension, and it is a situation in which they didn't do the incident. Let's say that administration didn't go through and do a fair investigation in listening to the side of the student and listening to the side of the teacher and then making a decision. Let's say that the administrator is only siding with the teacher. Enough of those things happening when you have these unfair disciplinary suspension practices going on, students don't want to come to school because they feel like they're not being heard. Even if the student may have done some part of it that doesn't really need them, there isn't a necessity for them to be suspended. But then because they've had so many, or because the student is not believable, and then the student is given the suspension or they're given some unfair disciplinary action, then this will keep a student out of school. They will avoid it. I've had students as a teacher as well as an administrator, and I think I've seen more since my tenure in administration, students who they just did not want to come because they were being written up for small things. And then depending on who their administrator was, if the administrator was not listening to the student's side, the student just wanted to give up. And that's where we do not serve our students well, when we as administrators, if we're not doing our due diligence to listen to both sides of what's going on. And just because little Jimmy is acting up again in class, that doesn't mean that we need to throw the hammer at this child and give double consequences, triple consequences. We are supposed to make sure that we investigate, we look into the situation, we hear the students out, because the students don't lie all the time. Even the students that we know are our most active students, as far as their behavior, we still have to listen to them. And when we stop listening, then we turn them off from coming to school. Yes, we know we have to deal with giving out consequences. And OSS is one of those things that depending on what district you serve in, if you are an administrator listening to this, ISS, OSS, detention, conferences, that may be the gist of what you can do. There are some creative things that you can actually implement in order to have fewer students who are suspended, but that it takes putting the work in and making sure that everyone, all your staff is on board and doing those creative things. We may do a podcast on that later on down the line, but making sure that we are fair in our acts when we are dealing with a student's discipline is very important, very important. Another aversion would be, and I've touched on this when we were talking about struggling academically and behaviorally, undiagnosed disability or disability accommodations. We know that our students who have a diagnosis and they have a disability, we know it, they have the IEP, or they may have a 504 plan that must be followed. Those students, they may struggle if they do not have the right person, the right case manager, that special education teacher who is there as their advocate when it comes to making sure that they are getting the services that they should be receiving in order to be successful with the work. It requires the special education teacher and the general education teachers to be on the same page and to come together to make sure everything is right for that student. But our students, sometimes they become frustrated because they feel as if they should be working at a different pace than everyone else. And so we have to pay attention to our special needs population and notice when they begin to slip away from us and it seems as if they are not wanting to put forth the effort anymore. You've got to gauge and see when the work is becoming more difficult for the individual and where they would need to have more support. So that's another aversion. The last aversion we're going to look at is students who have parents or grandparents who had their own negative educational experiences. They have an impact on their children or their grandchildren. We have students who are being raised by their grandparents, and their grandparents may not have finished high school, or they had they may have stopped their education when they were in elementary school. And so, I'm bringing that up because depending on what generation you are, my grandparents, they did not finish. I'm 50, and my grandparents, they did not finish elementary school. But my mom and my dad, they finished high school. My dad had his associate's degree. And so I am coming from a generation where it was not unheard of that your grandparents did not finish up elementary school. So when you have individuals that may not have finished, or they had negative experiences themselves, they may put their own feelings onto their children, their grandchildren. And for those reasons, the students are just like, I don't want to go to school either. My Nana, she made it through and she was fine. My granddad, he made it through. He was fine. They seem to be doing well. And so they attribute doing well with what they see. And if they see house, home, job, money in the pockets, then the students are okay. But we have to take a look at that. And even if we had negative experiences at school, that doesn't mean that we want to put that on to our children. I had negative experiences all through my years of being in school, from kindergarten on up until my senior year. I had some type of negative experience. Middle school was just, those 3 years were just very painful for me, very painful. But I did not put that pain onto my children and made them feel uncomfortable about middle school life or just about school in general. So we have to be careful as caregivers, as the parents, as the role models, as the mentors. We need to make sure that we're careful about what we put onto our children and our grandchildren, because an aversion for us, if we're putting that onto our children, it becomes an aversion to them, and then they don't want to attend school. And so the last reason for students not attending school, the disengagement, just going to go through these topics, and because again, we've touched on these, but disengagement, that could be anything from not having enough challenging instruction, our students being bored, not having meaningful relationships with the adults in the building, lack of enrichment opportunities. Some students, instead of needing remediation and having more support, some students need to have more enrichment because they finished everything up so quickly in class and they need something else, not something more, but something that's going to enrich their experience and what they're doing currently. That may mean doing a project that goes into detail as to the information that they've covered versus being handed a worksheet, another worksheet. We as educators have to come up with ways in order to make sure our students are gaining the information that they need to receive from us and do it in a creative manner. That doesn't mean putting on a dog and pony show. I don't believe in dog and pony shows. And even with my teachers, over the years, I tell them, I'm not looking for a dog and pony show. I know what good instruction looks like. So if it doesn't look right to me, and I can tell from the students and how I'm asking questions, then we have to do something different. But our students that need more enrichment, they will easily get turned off from school if they're not getting it, which goes back to them being bored. Lack of academic and behavioral support. This is one of those issues that if the school is understaffed, it could be a problem. Because if you're understaffed, you may not have the individuals that can help give that support. If the classroom teacher is giving one level of support, and if there needs to be someone else that can follow through that is in a coaching or a specialist type of role, whether it's a behavioral specialist or academic coach, academic specialist, if you are lacking people in your building due to individuals that have left positions that have been unfilled because they left so quickly, or, there's just not enough people within education that are wanting to come into education, then that can definitely be an issue for our students. If they are not receiving the support, then they get turned off from being in school and thus they don't attend. And then if students are failing to earn credits, and that in itself is that's self-explanatory. If you're not earning the credits as a high school student, we talk more about credits. If as a high school student, if you're not getting the credits to go on to the next grade level, then you will become disenchanted with the whole process. Because if you are a third year student in high school, you are considered a junior. But if you're a third year student in high school and you have a number 9 on your schedule, other students, they see you in the ninth grade classes again, because this is your third time, your third rodeo. That's a whole nother topic in itself, as well as talking about our students and them not being successful, and what can we do to help support. So this podcast will continue to go on because there are so many topics that we can do deep dives into when we're talking about the classroom. And so I'm just happy about how this has evolved over time and appreciate you all being with me on this journey in looking at an effective classroom environment. The last topic of disengagement is working out conflicts with being in high school. So this is specifically about high school students. High school students tend to have where they have more responsibilities on themselves. And some of those conflicts come in with, do I work 30 hours a week and still be able to maintain a 3.0, 4.0 GPA, or do I want to put more time in my work 40 hours a week and just not come to school? It's a conflict. Now, for us as parents, it's not a conflict. We look at it as you need to get your education first. Work can come later, unless there are things that the students want to get. Then it's a tug of war. It's definitely a tug of war. So there are conflicts as high school students that have to work out about being in high school. Do they ride the school bus, or do they work in order to get a car because that's the only way they're going to get the car because their parents are not going to give them one, or there's no money in the budget to be able to get one. So these are issues that high schoolers have to look at. So those are we've now completed looking at our 4 categories as to why students do not attend school. These are just our 4 categories that we've talked about over the course of our series. We talked about misconceptions. We've talked about barriers. And then today we've talked about aversions and disengagement. And again, this information is all available to you as well on attendanceworks.org. There's a wealth of information there, a lot of things for parents as well as school officials. So I would encourage you to go to that site if you're not familiar with it, as we are preparing for the upcoming school year. September is attendance awareness. And so just having this information now helps us before the school year begins, and looking at what can we do in order to help our students to attend to win so that we can combat chronic absenteeism. This has been my pleasure to finish the series with you all. Thank you again for joining me on this episode of The Road to an Effective Classroom Environment. I am your host, Dr. LaShanta. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.